So first off, I'd like to welcome everybody who's taken the time out to join this talk. Before we begin, I'd just like to let you know that this session will be a recorded session. So if you're okay with that, please stay with us. The recorded session will be used for our own purposes and for sharing the event following the live event. Peter, if you wouldn't mind actually hitting the record button there, because I think you're host at the moment. I'd much appreciate that.
I'll find the record button.
Yeah, it's just down the bottom there.
I have it actually. I got pause and stop, so I assume it actually is recording.
Oh yeah, it's recording. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, look, we would normally host this event within our each and other offices, and we do miss all having you in person, and it's a real shame that we can't have you all in one space. But we're doing everything we can by hosting our events online now. So, but we hope very soon we'll be able to have you all in one place, and we can enjoy more conversation before and after these talks. Sometime soon, it's looking like. So fingers crossed. Just a little bit of a background into Each and Other. Each and Other is a strategic UX design agency based in Dublin. We work domestically and internationally with the likes of Google, 3, Bank of the West, and Kingspan. And just back in 2020, we were awarded Best UX Agency in Europe. And just this month, we've been shortlisted for the Global Best Small Agency Award. So we're really hoping that goes our way in the next few months. A background into Chalk Talks, which is the event you've so kindly joined. Chalk Talks historically really are a space for us to share ideas and experiences internally as a team, but we made the decision to open that out to the world and bring you all along with us in sharing our knowledge and experience. So today's format will be a panel discussion. That panel will be made up of 2, and hopefully we'll get some really interesting enlightening moments where we learn where design can bring value in new and interesting ways. The first 10 minutes really are going to be an introduction into the topic, which our first panel member will go through, and then there'll be a 30-minute discussion between with our panel on the topic, and we'll have 20 or so minutes towards the end for Q&A. Throughout the talk, if you could just remain on mute, we will call you for questions and for the questions and answers section. So I do invite you to post any questions that you have throughout the talk into chat, but also introduce yourself and let us know what you do in chat as well. And when it comes to the Q&A section, we'll call on people to voice any questions that they have. Today's talk will be discussing low code and, define what that is and look at what that means for design and the design process. Really why it's gaining traction, why it's becoming a really popular approach, and how it's democratizing technology and enabling the citizen developer to create things easier. In order to facilitate this topic, we've got two guest speakers today. We have Peter Rose. Peter Rose is a co-founder and CTO of TEKenable. If you don't know TEKenable already, TEKenable delivers IT projects to large and small organizations, both private and public. And we also have Brian Hearn, our very own principal designer here at Each Another. So TEKenable had really seen an increase in the need for and want for a low-code approach. So that really begged the question with us, well, what is low-code and what value can design bring within that space? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn this conversation over to Peter, and Peter will take us through defining what low-code is. So first off, thank you, Peter, for your time. Really delighted to have you here, and Brian, it's always good to have you on our talk. So looking forward to this one.
Brilliant, thanks, Billy. And good to be here too. So as Billy said, I'm going to take you through what is low code. I mean, a lot of you may very well already know, but some of you, it might be a new topic for you before we discuss what the implications are for design. So next slide, what is low code anyway? I'll take you in. So really, I suppose there's been a traditional way of writing computer systems over the years, or writing software solutions over the years. And it typically involved, writing hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions of lines of software code. There's an example on the screen there for you. To do this required specialist skills and years of experience. I mean, typically you'd have to study for 4 years before coming out with a degree, and then you're an intern for some period and a graduate, and so on and so on and so on, until after maybe 20 years, somebody might trust you with something important. But the challenge is that within the software that's written, literally every line that's written is typed in by hand and can contain a potential bug. So it has a fairly high risk, which has to be countered by quite a lot of testing that takes place. You're testing not just for the business process that it's implemented the thing or delivered the solution you were hoping it would deliver, but also that the technology, the underlying thing, that the field appears in the right place, that it accepts the right kind of dates, etc., the technical aspects as well as the business aspects. And that drives a lot of cost and an awful lot of difficulty to change it ultimately in the long run. So what's happened in the last 4 to 5 years? I mean, the solutions have come of age. They've been around a lot longer than that. You'll find low-code solutions all the way back to sort of the early 90s, etc. But they've come of age for building enterprise-class systems now. And the difference really is, as I've shown on the screen here, on the right-hand side is a visual designer. This is an actual screenshot taken from a low-code solution, Microsoft Dynamics Power Platform. And it shows a visual representation of a business process flow. Now, the details in the individual boxes don't really matter, but it's allowing people, rather than writing lines of code, to use a visual designer, to use drag and drop, click and tick type configuration. So you can build a business process flow that says at the beginning, maybe it says send an email to somebody advertising an event, and then it can react to something that might happen. So they've clicked on the link in that email, and the next thing the business process flow says to do is send them some more details of that event. And if they've registered for the event, the business process flow might say something like, send them a reminder the day before. There's a chalk and talk coming up with Each Another tomorrow. And you can drive all of that sort of interaction from a marketing point of view, but also more mundane business processes like insurance underwriting and so on and so forth. You do all of that from a visual design tool. I don't have to write a single line of code to make that happen. And that makes it very obvious to the person doing it what they've built, very obvious to anybody reviewing it what it's going to do. And it opens up the possibility to non-technical people to do it. So you need a lot less training and experience. The platform itself that you're telling to implement this business flow, you haven't built it, it's been provided to you, and it's been used to build literally hundreds of millions of systems in the past. So it's trusted. It does what it says it will do. And if you drag the box on that says send the email will get sent. So when you do testing, you're no longer testing the functionality of the platform. You just really have to test the business flow. Have you created the right thing? Have you connected it to the right email to send? Are you describing the correct event, as opposed to will it send it? So there's a lot less testing required. And the result then is that the whole thing is significantly easier to change and significantly less cost to implement typically. So let's take a look at one example. And what I've got here on the screen is, I hope you can see it okay. On the right-hand side is a visual flow design for a chatbot. So starting at the top, it's looking at certain trigger phrases and says, you know, if they type in something that looks a bit like this, ask the question. And then there's a whole branching piece down below that says, okay, if they selected this particular option, then go this direction. If it selected that option, go the other direction. And what you're doing is you're laying out a conversation flow. It says nothing about where the chatbot will appear, nothing about the technology, nothing about how it understands what the person wants to achieve in talking to that bot. It just says, this is the conversational flow that I want to have. And you can then test this thing interactively. So on the left-hand side in this visual designer, you can see an actual conversation taking place that starts off with the bot saying, if you'd like to speak to a human agent, let me know. And the potential user, which is the tester in this case, are there any stores around me, and so on and so on. So while you're designing this conversational flow in the visual designer, you can also be seeing the impact and how it will look to an end user. When you've got that completed in the way you want it to do, you hit a publish button on the left-hand side, and it publishes it to the world, and you can then plug it into your website, into your mobile phone application, etc., just as a service. You literally just pull in a couple of lines of code, and there it is. It's on the web, it's on the service. And if you want to change it, you go back into the visual designer and you make the changes to it. You can also then get stats and statistics and process flow maps and so on that will give you the most commonly used paths through the flow, etc., etc. But it's all visual. And the point I want to make is that low code is really about using visual designers to create things and not so much about writing lines of code. So why did low code come into being? So I call this the efficiency gap, and I apologize in advance. I'm well aware that most of the audience I'm talking to are designers. You're probably going to hate what I've done here, but I'm a techie, so you're going to have to forgive me. So what I've got here is a graph that illustrates, I suppose, the rate of change against time in any given business. And the blue line is the change of the business itself, the business processes and the things the business does. And the red line is the rate of change that the IT solutions will have within that business. And in this example, it's talking about bespoke code, so what I'll call the old way of doing things. So typically what happens in any business is they go along for a little while and there's very little change in that business. Think insurance companies, banks, etc. They haven't really changed that much in 100 years. Yes, they popped out the odd mobile app, etc. But still, if I want to get a credit card off Bank of Ireland today, I still have to go in and fill out a whole bunch of paper forms. Even during COVID, the banks are requiring me to fill out paper forms and physically visit the banks to do stuff. So in comes a consultant and says you need an efficiency drive, and something changes about the way the business does things. But classically, the IT function itself is underinvested and doesn't get to change as quickly as the business wants to change the process. Then the next thing that comes along is actually sort of changes inflicted upon that particular business, and the market has moved in some way. Maybe a competitor's come in, maybe one of their competitors has changed the way they do things, and it's forcing the business to change much more quickly, but IT can't keep pace with that. And then obviously what's happened very recently is something like a pandemic comes along, doesn't happen very often, fortunately, but something like a pandemic comes along and forces a significant shift in the marketplace. So you're suddenly talking about remote working implications, massive demand for unplanned change. And in fact, IT actually slows down. The rate of change of IT actually goes down in such a scenario because they're dealing with so many things on so many fronts. Issuing laptops to people that were desktop based, worrying about security of home workers, etc., that they hadn't to do before, that they're even less able to cope with the situation. And what happens in there is the whole thing goes into complete meltdown, and you end up with a massive gap between the IT and the business process. Into that gap typically comes point solutions. So little applications start to pop up. You find the business keeping spreadsheets, tracking things. You find them creating their own little access databases, etc., really compensating for the main system's deficiencies. And as I say here, when we go into a business, the symptoms we actually look for include Excel, access, excessive costs, and loss of temper, because that's usually what's happening in the organization when the IT is no longer supporting the business process. So let's have a look at this. What does the scenario look like with a low-code solution? So starting off in exactly the same way and making the exact same changes to the business that we just looked at, the efficiency drive, the react to market shift, and the pandemic. And what we find is that because in a low-code solution, the processes are easily changed. You go into the visual designer, you change the business process. I've just shown you the designer. If you want to change forms or reports or make new integrations, there's a whole bunch of off-the-shelf modules that let you do that very quickly right out of the box. And if you want to deploy new advanced capabilities such as AI into the business, for example, again, they are drag and drop capabilities. You no longer need somebody with huge technical ability. So the IT system can track the business demands much more closely. And the net effect then is happier users and more efficient processes. The reason why Excel and Access is bad, typically, I mean, multifarious reasons, but generally it doesn't scale. It can't work across multiple teams. People tend to overwrite each other's data. There's no audit trail associated with it. Security's hard to implement and so on and so forth. So that's why we try to squeeze them out. So comparing the two, looking at the efficiency gap, what we see is that low code is effectively enabling rapid change. It enables the business to keep pace with advancing technology because the platform's continually evolving without them having to do anything. The technology's made available to them. A new visual designer appears for this, new capabilities appear for that. We get lower risk of bugs in the organization, so for testing can focus on the business functionality and not the technical. You get more bang for your buck, effectively, more functionality for every euro that you spend, and it improves the efficiency gap, so the business ultimately is better supported. And just to bring in, I suppose, the last piece of this, just to give you an example of a real example and ground it in reality. Part of what TEKenable did last year was we built the contact tracing system for the HSE. And I don't mean the mobile app aspect of it. That was a company called Nearform, and they did a great job in terms of producing the mobile app. What we did was we produced the contact tracing system used by the call centers behind the scenes. And I suppose what we did there was we were called into Dr. Stevens Hospital to work with the emergency response team. I got a call on a Tuesday evening at 9:30 p.m. We had a team of 7 people in Dr. Stevens the following morning at 9 a.m. And within 6 days, we had the very first version of contact tracing system live. It was used by the Army. While we were building it, the Army was reefing out the basement of Dr. Stevens Hospital, throwing filing cabinets and chairs and stuff out into the courtyard, and building the call center. Literally, as we were building the software, we were training them as we built the software, and within 6 days, they built the call center and we delivered the system. Up to that point, they've been trying to do it off spreadsheets. And back in March last year, it was almost possible to do it with spreadsheets. There weren't the volume, but very, very quickly the system ramped up. We ended up with over 2,000 users of the system, constantly evolving as the approach to the pandemic changed. As the quote there from the HSE CIO says, the system key tool in the reduction of the rate of spread of the viral outbreak. It's one of the systems that we've built that's truly had an impact on the general public. Just as a note for later on, the internal system, this is an actual screenshot on the right-hand side here. The internal system looks like that and is relatively prescribed by the tool set we're using, the Microsoft Dynamics Power Platform, as to how that looks. Whereas the external facing systems, we built portals for booking tests, we built mobile interfaces for all sorts. We're building a national PPE management system as we speak. The external facing stuff used by the general public tends to be bespoke still. It tends to be built on Angular implementations or React.js, that type of technologies, but it's still a bespoke kind of a build. So I hope that gives you some sense of the difference between bespoke code and visual design, also known as low code. It's not no code, right? No code is a totally different type of solution. It's low code in that the majority of what you want to do can be achieved with visual design tools. Sometimes we have to extend the functionality of the platform using bespoke software to make it do things it wasn't envisaged to do. So it's low code, not no code, but it's significantly faster, significantly better than what is currently on the table. What do you think, Brian?
Brilliant.
I'm going to get rid of the slideshow here so that stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for starting to drive through that. I see some questions coming in, so I would definitely encourage people to continue to fire in thoughts or even anecdotes as well as they're coming up. But yeah, thanks for driving that through with us, Peter. So just to recap, you've 30 years experience. Sorry if I'm aging you here in IT delivery.
I started young, you're all right.
Yeah, TEKenable itself in business since 2002. accelerating and going from strength to strength, new investment from good buddies coming in, expanding out, footprint in Dubai, in London. You are going through a period of immense growth at the moment and aggressively pursuing things. And you know, we're hopefully going to continue to work together on and off in the future as well. But where does that moment in your journey come in where low code starts to become not only a viable option, but something that's important for you as an organization to start leaning into?
It was almost exactly 5 years ago. And we could see a shift in the market, and we've spent the last 19 years delivering bespoke code solutions. So the very technology that I'm disparaging on this call is exactly what's fed us and kept us in business for the last 19 years. But 5 years ago, we saw two major shifts taking place. One was a shift towards SaaS provision. So there were fewer bespoke solutions being built in the marketplace because there were more business solutions available online to pay for on a per user per month with a credit card type basis. So the demand for bespoke code, it didn't actually reduce, but it shifted somewhat. And the other move that happened was the low code, in that a lot of the platforms that are out there, I mean, we're a Microsoft focused organization at this stage. We use Dynamics and Power Platform, but there are many other platforms. The Salesforce would fall into that category, Mendix OutSystems, you know, the Pega, for example. There are other platforms. And they've all sort of come of age, if you like. Prior to about 5 years ago, we wouldn't have considered using them on enterprise class. They were fine for small applications, but enterprise large solutions, they weren't in the game for. And about that time, we started to see them become capable of enterprise solutions. And we realized that's the way the market was going to move. Because of all the benefits of it, it was inevitable that bespoke development would reduce and low-code solutions would come in. So we made quite a significant investment for us at the time, built a team, built capability on the basis that if we build it, they will come.
And they're coming, right?
Oh, yeah. Our challenge now actually is people. I mean, we've gone, we were actually looking at some numbers earlier today in the context of something else, and we've hired in the first 3 months of this year more people than we had in the entire company 4 years ago. The growth rate is insane, and it's purely being driven by demand for that business. Low code has taken our revenues and multiplied them by 10.
So can I throw some stats at you, Peter? So I've been doing my homework a little bit on this. So I want to throw three sort of stats at you and just get your reactions. The first is a Forrester stat, which says executives in customer service, product development, and sales were the harshest critics of CTOs, with 79% saying that IT does not accelerate their success. So that's pointing to part of what you're saying in that efficiency gap.
The efficiency gap, exactly. IT's traditionally been seen as a drag on the business, which is very unfair because they've been saddled with you know, a lot of demands that perhaps they shouldn't have over the years, but they've been seen by business always as a cost center and an efficiency constrainer rather than a supporter of the business. Right,
rather than an enabler, which is what it's supposed to be doing, right? And the other two things I want to throw at you, which are interesting. This one's a Forrester stat as well, which says half of developers are now using or plan to use low-code platforms within the next 12 months. So that's 50%. Do you find that surprising, or does that in tune with what you're experiencing in the market?
No, I don't find it surprising, partly because the salary rates for low-code developers are higher than bespoke developers, so it's a logical career choice. I mean, if you want to earn more money, you need to be where the demand is.
And the final one I have is by 2024, low-code application development will be responsible for more than 65% of all application development activity.
It's interesting because Gartner says 75%, but you know, nobody really knows.
Yeah, Gartner must be trying to sell something.
They're all forecasts. They're all forecasts. But you know, the reality is, if you have a tool set that delivers things faster, with lower cost, and with greater flexibility and lower cost of ownership, ultimately from a technical point of view, there's licensing. Obviously, it has to be paid for these things, which you don't have with bespoke solutions typically. But from a technical point of view, it's lower cost for maintenance because you make changes quicker. Then it's going to be the tool set that's taking over. And because it's now reached the maturity where enterprise businesses across the world, I think something like 95% of the Fortune 500 companies has at least 4 of these things in their business right now today. And I don't mean just, maybe the visitor management app on the front desk. I mean something significant in their business that's actually critical to them. It's going to take over. It's going to be the dominant technology.
Well, that was going to be the next thing I was going to put to you. Like, are we in a hype cycle where this is sort of ballooning up, but is going to reach a sort of a level, or are we really looking at long-term systemic change in how things are developed?
No, it's actually been through the hype cycle. It's been through the whole pit of despair thing, and it's now coming out the other side. Because traditionally, and I'm probably going to offend an awful lot of marketing people by saying this, but traditionally the marketing tends to be ahead of the technology. So they're promising capabilities that it doesn't actually really have just yet, and promising outcomes. That's why I'm saying sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I would not have inflicted low-code solutions upon my customer base. We were selling bespoke solutions and doing quite well doing it. It's only about 5 years ago that the technology really caught up, the capabilities really caught up.
Yeah, so you're talking about like the space that you're working in mostly is enterprise development. So you're thinking Microsoft Dynamics Power Platform, you're thinking Pega, Salesforce, those are the big players.
Yeah.
But us as designers, we've probably come across these tools and maybe not even known it, right? So if we're designing websites, there's a lot of brand names out there that operate in this space that we'd be familiar with. So who else should we be thinking of when we think of low code or no code solutions?
In terms of technology providers?
Technology providers, I'm also thinking sort of web, in web design and those elements as well. Where would we have come across these tools, not just in a enterprise level?
Well, arguably things like the BI type solutions that people have within their organizations that are rendering dashboards, the Tableaus, the Click, for example, arguably they're low code solutions as well, just because they're not automating business processes, they're producing dashboards, and people are having to design what goes on the dashboard, how it's disseminated, that type of thing. From a web design point of view, you may very well be front-ending to business systems in the back office that are built using low code, but you might not know it. You're just calling into web APIs to get data, fetch data, submit forms, trigger something to happen in the back office. So they're not sort of a mysterious thing sitting in the corner. That you talk to them in exactly the same way that you would have potentially spoken to any other system built using bespoke technology. Not sure if that answers your question, but
yeah, it does. But I guess it goes all the way down to very B2C focused web design platforms. Like if you look at something like Squarespace or Webflow, these are part of that same conversation, right? We're just not talking the same level of functionality or scale.
Yeah, anything.
Yeah,
and anything with a visual design tool is pretty much classed as low code. Okay, and you'll get a lot of point solutions for doing specific things. The difference between the Squarespaces of this world and the likes of Pega, Dynamics, Salesforce, etc., is then they're platforms, they're ERP platforms that span such a width of the functionality that business needs, and they tend to be highly integrated. So in Dynamics, we have modules that are financials, like accounting systems. We have CRM, we have case management, field service, etc., 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 all out of the box functionality that you can deploy into your average business, plus the ability to build your own applications as well using the exact same technology. So you've got the little point solutions that you can put in, say, I want to build a website, I can use that. I want a BI tool, I can use that. And you've also got the big platforms that are totally integrated together and interoperate really well as a result.
So if you have this interoperability, if that's the right word, and if you have all these elements that you can pull on, like, how does that change how you approach projects? Like, surely it can't be the same approach as bespoke. How have you changed your process? Do you have different conversations with clients? Do you have to plan differently? Or is it similar, you're just using different tools?
It's similar, Brian, from an IT perspective, right? I think from a design perspective, it's different. But from an IT perspective, we're still delivering projects that are either, they tend not to be waterfall in nature. They tend not to be the sort of, sit down for 6 months, write a whole bunch of documents, and then go off for 2 years, build a system and come back with a big fanfare. That doesn't work anymore for a lot of the things that we do, because things change too quickly. And while you're away building these lines of code for 2 years and you come back and declare with a big fanfare, the business has gone from here to here, and it's no longer relevant. So we tend to do a lot more agile, sort of Scrum-based type of approaches to building things. We still need to do some groundwork at the outset in terms of establishing what the objectives are, what the business needs are, but the details of implementation can be worked out on the fly, as it were, because the toolkits let you change things so quickly. If you don't like it, just change it. You know, you're not into oh God, I've got to spend 3 weeks doing this and retesting it. You just drag the thing to a different place in the visual designer, you swap it for something else, and there it is, it's changed. I'm simplifying a bit, but you get the point.
You're giving me the sales pitch rather than the reality, yeah. Are you? Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about, you mentioned there about how your practice from an IT perspective maybe hasn't changed quite so much, although there is some adaptation and changes in emphasis perhaps. So then when you think about design and how it integrates with low code, has that changed? Is it more important or less important? I guess is the big question that we're having at the moment.
Ooh, I can feel the collective audience staring at me. What's he going to say? Is he going to say something? Our jobs are at an end or something? No, design has always been important and always will be important, right? It's what you're designing that might change a little bit. So if you remember back to the last slide in that little presentation I did at the outset of the HSE solution, it said the back office systems, the internal facing systems, have a fairly prescribed format to them. The tool lays them out, all the screens out in a consistent fashion so that they are understandable immediately by the users as to what they can do on each of these screens. And the opportunity for design in the back office then is more about the process. It's more about the business process. It's service design, it's process design, it's CX, it's good, you know, it's good usability. You do have control over where fields are, how they're blocked up, what becomes visible at what point in time, all that sort of stuff. So the usability becomes the big aspect of it. You've very limited control over how it looks in terms of color schemes and so on and so forth. There's a little bit of control, but you can't fundamentally rearrange the screens and change it into something totally different. So it's the emphasis there is process flow service design, whereas the public facing systems are exactly as, you know, as I said, they're typically the bespoke traditional website type of thing, whereby you've got a web interface that still needs to be very clean and clear and obvious to people how they use it, but you've got the full scope that you always did have to make it look whatever way you want it to look, make it behave however you want it to behave. So I think at the moment, those public facing, you know, there are low code portal creation tools, and they do have utility in certain situations, but they're kind of constrained at the moment in terms of what you can do with them, what you can build with them. So for public facing stuff where we really want it to be a first class user experience, we go back to bespoke. The tools will catch up, right? I mean, the low code tools will eventually allow us to deliver that first class user experience that we're getting from bespoke, but the design will always be needed at the front end and the process at the back end.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this comes down to what we actually mean by design, right? So because design has many different aspects. You can have the CX idea that you're trying to create, or the impact you're trying to create. You can have the UI, which is, you know, the look and feel, the interactions of it, how nice it is, and then you have this wedge of UX in the middle. So when we look at these solutions, it's about understanding what we actually mean by design, and a lot of it is about who owns the solution. So how do you approach those conversations with clients? Is that something that you're breaking down through user journeys, or are you relying on them to direct you in requirements?
Well, we bring you in, Brian. That's how we approach it. I mean, we recognize our limitations in this regard. You know, they are very different skill sets. The ability to build a system from a technical point of view, and I understand all the, you know, myself and my team understand all the nuances of how to integrate with AS400s and IBM mainframes, use robotic process automation to access, you know, legacy systems, to do AI machine learning models and so on and so forth, but none of that is worth a damn unless you actually have a means of presenting it that's meaningful to the end user, and a way of navigating through the systems that they don't have to think about or reference a 72-page manual to figure out. So our skill sets in building things, and in the smaller systems, yeah, we do it ourselves. We understand process design, we understand how to make things reasonably cleanly designed. But for the bigger systems, we partner with each other and hand it over to your skill set, because that's where the real difference between a mass adoption of a system and and potentially the failure of the system actually lies within your domain, not ours.
So now I know that each and other team are just breathing a gigantic sigh of relief. we're safe. We're all good. Because Peter's gonna bring us in. So that's what I find really interesting is that depending on the definition of design, there is still room for that understanding how things work, and also focus. Well, first of all, it's focusing on the right thing. What are the right things to solve? How do we prioritize interfaces? And then making sure that what we're producing actually does the job that's intended. So that the same stages of research through to definition, through to test and implementation are still the stages that we move towards. What I am interested in is the speed that we can get there, and also the amount of decision making that's taken off of our plate, which potentially can be a good thing. So when you say that there's limitations within the UI on the backend tools in particular, that's maybe not a bad thing, because we could spend weeks drawing boxes and working on layouts, when in fact, in many instances, that's not what's important, right? It's speed of task.
100%. And when I say there's limitations, I suppose limitations is probably the wrong word. It's actually been through a really significant analysis process by the vendors of these particular products, to work out what is going to be the best user interface for a business-facing back office type system. And they put all that effort into the design, and what the tool is giving us is consistency and the ability to reuse that in a way that would make sense to people. So while yes, you can't change it very much, you can decide that the name and address block is at the top left-hand side and the insurance quotation block is at the top right, for example, or swap them around, whatever. But you can't change the business process flow steps are across the top of the screen and the searches at the top right-hand side. It's because they put all that effort into figuring out that that's how it should be, and by making it impossible to change it, they're constraining us to best practice. That's the way I'd like to see it. And then having enforced that best practice and consistency across all of the systems that are in that platform, then you guys come into play in conjunction with us to work out, are we in the right jungle? Are we solving the right business problem? Are we using the right tools for it? Is the process that we're following the most effective way of doing that? And is it meaningful to the user? Does the user understand what they have to do next and why? And that's part of the design journey for this.
Yeah, one of the things that is interesting about that is that the traditional UX process, the traditional design process, is sort of measure twice, cut once, right? So we sometimes, if I'm in a sales pitch, I'll trot out that a good UX process can save 30 to 50% in dev time. Why? Because we're doing the right thing, and we don't have to make change requests afterwards, right? So we're designing and fixing the problems before build. What's exciting about this process is that in many situations, depending on the priorities of the business, we can move to implementation, but the costs of fixing aren't there, right? So the idea of the level of accuracy or confidence that we need in designs could potentially be reduced, as long as we know that we're going to be able to come in and work through a fast fixing stage afterwards, right?
It could, but I challenge you a little bit, Brian, because you still need to put the thought in up front. You don't want to release a system to the end users that is a bit crap, right? You just don't, because you'll lose the heart and minds battle, and they'll say this technology is rubbish and they'll blame the project team or whatever else. You still need to give it a good deal of thought and get it right as you can from the outset. And the fact that you can change it quickly shouldn't be an excuse for doing a poor job on designing it in the first place. It should be used to reflect changes in the business.
Absolutely. Dead right, Peter. Good answer. So one thing that I am interested in, though, is that part of the promise of these solutions is that the control that you're able to give the client afterwards, right? So, as the system gets built, part of the promise is, hey, this is yours to grow over time. So is there risk in handing over those processes? So we do a great job together of, as you said, figuring out the right problem and delivering the right system. Over time, is there risk that things start to break, or they experiment and they look at the wrong things and the customer experience starts to break over time? Is that a risk?
Yes, and there's a whole concept I might introduce. It was alluded to earlier around citizen developer. that's really important in this. So give you were quoting some stats at the beginning. It's my turn. I'm quoting some stats for you. So Mendix, for example, are come out there about 6 months ago and said that in their experience, 40% of low-code developers have a business background, not IT, right? And of that 40%, 70% of those learn to build applications in 1 month or less. Right. I mean, you compare that with the 4-year computer science degree that gets you to the point where you can sort of start doing things. To be able to take a non-technical user, a business user, and have them utilize their knowledge of the business to build applications in under a month's worth of experience is a radical shift, But what that does is it tends to frighten enterprise businesses because they don't want a proliferation of little point solutions popping up here, there, and everywhere across the business. They have to worry about things like data protection and compliance with regulation and so on and so forth, which mightn't be front of mind for the person that's building the application. So there needs to be governance around this. And one of the things that we do with our customers is, yes, you can have the citizen developer within your organization who can use these tools to extend what we've done to build new things. And yes, even the IT department tends to get involved and making changes to the stuff that we do after we've delivered it. But you still need that governance. You still need that formality and the process around it. Otherwise, you're going to end up allowing people to potentially break things that are working perfectly well, simply because they didn't understand the implications of what they were doing.
There is an example that you've talked about before from Heathrow, right?
Yeah, it's quite a famous one. There's a Heathrow security guard, Heathrow Airport security guard, who was somewhat frustrated because he could see in his job and his domain of experience within the airport that there were things that they could do better. That if only I had a mobile app that would allow me to do this, if only I had a way of doing that. And he, was an inquisitive individual and found the Microsoft Power Platform online one night and the citizen developer agenda and said, that's what I want to do. So he actually built some of these applications himself with absolutely zero background in anything other than being a security guard and a decent human being. And he was able to build these applications, brought them in to show to colleagues on his phone, on the tablet, etc. Brought them in and said, what do you think of this? And this is brilliant. Start using it. And I think about 6 months afterwards, somewhere in that ilk, he developed enough of these things that he actually got a job. He stopped being a security guard, and Heathrow's employed him as an innovation champion within the organization, with the role of going around to other areas in the airport and finding other areas which could benefit from that technology. And he's now been given a team to go and do that with and deliver the solutions. So that's not that unusual, to be honest, within these sorts of things. And before all the developers on the call start to panic and think that all the business users are going to take over and start building the systems, this works perfectly well for point solutions. I want something to do X within my domain. When you're talking about enterprise systems that span multiple departments and integrate with multiple silos of data and talk to legacy systems and so on and so forth, that's when people like us come into play, because that's just a skill set that needs a little bit more than the citizen developer can bring to the board. But it does open the possibility of businesses being quite self-service. And that should frighten you a little bit, Brian, from a UX CX point of view in terms of the experience, because the tool set's imposing a certain standard of how things are laid out, etc. But where's the governance in terms of how all this fits together and how it forms a good experience overall? That's what you need to bring to it.
I think this thing, we could go on forever on this, I think, but I am conscious of time, so I'm just going to turn conversation over to the some of our audience here. There's a few questions coming through. So I have one here from Alan Dillon, I think. Where would you recommend business analysts upskill on low-code solutions? Like, how do they go about it?
Good question, Alan.
Alan, if you want to turn your mic on and field that question yourself, it's up to you.
If you go to the Microsoft website and go to the Power Platform section, you can actually stand up an instance of Power Platform on the Azure cloud literally by pressing a button. It's free of charge for non-professional users. And there's a whole library of video introductions, tutorials, etc. on how to do things. And the best way to get started is to actually stand up a copy in the cloud and start using it, start playing with it.
Thanks, Peter.
No problem. I'll provide a link to somewhere, sort of a getting started place, if you like. I'll send it into Billy after the call, and you can maybe send it around to people.
Yeah, that'll do. We have a question here from John Conway. I think we may have touched on it, but maybe John, you want to expand on it now. How does TEKenable design digital evolution, and do they use any design thinking in their digital evolution?
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I've literally come off a training course 2 weeks ago, which is a refresher course in effectively what Microsoft call the catalyst process, actually, which is really design thinking, the whole double diamond concept, etc. Yeah, it hasn't changed any of that. It really is, as I said, talking about, are you solving the right business problem for the right reasons, and what are the right technologies to use? And low code isn't always the right technology to throw into play. And what are the business benefits you're trying to achieve? Will it get those benefits? You know, widening out on the first part of the diamond, the thinking, and then closing in the thing to come up with initiatives, and then widening it out again in terms of the how and closing it back again. All that type of stuff still totally applies in this scenario. It's just the tools we use to build them have changed.
To build on that point, which is sort of where we left off in our conversation as well. It's like this role of the designer. It is a mindset of how UX works anyway, to go to the ground and to understand what's happening, and then to build up a really clear picture that's not driven from the board level down about what should be fixed, but rather really understanding what's happening to develop a solution. So the idea of citizen designer doesn't mean I think that there's no room for design leadership in these things, which is the point that I think you were making, Peter, that there is still room for people to experiment and to deliver solutions, but there still can be room for an author or leader or decider to make sure that it ultimately aligns with the business goals are. So I see that the combination of these often maligned design thinking practice, obviously it's a terrible buzzword and it's very misused, yeah. I think. But the design process and the design leadership roles, I think, are potentially, when coupled with the technology that is able to produce fast results, becomes even more important in the process because you're able to affect change so quickly. Yes. So whether or not it's fully established as practice, I see that these things becoming very aligned very quickly, and those roles becoming much closer, I think.
And actually, one of the, I think, looking down the questions here, I'm not talking to the guy that said stare harder, guys. I'm not talking to him. But I think Peter asked the question, you know, do you think we might see some kind of new hybrid UX stroke low code designer role down the road? And I think absolutely. I mean, I think there's a really, going back to the 40% of people that do low code development actually have a business background. Why would 40% of the people who do low code development not have a UX background? I mean, you bring in two skill sets together. You're bringing the ability to understand, match the needs to the design, to the flow, and the ability to deliver it yourself. There's absolutely no reason why the UX CX team couldn't actually be the implementers of these systems.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, our work is we deliver prototypes, high fidelity ones as well. So it's in the same area in ways. Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Be careful, because prototypes have a habit of becoming production systems when you do them in low code.
I think on that, you know, we use these abstraction tools. I don't know, for those of you who are long in the tooth like myself, we used to use a tool called OmniGraffle, which got superseded by Sketch, which was sort of superseded by Figma. Each one becoming slightly more refined in its ability to get closer to the finished article, and then other sort of more interaction tools like Exure or UX Pin, but they're all abstractions. What's really exciting to me about the low code, either using the real enterprise platforms or indeed you know, smaller scale solutions, is its ability to prototype, because we're always looking for speed, how much time do I have to invest in it, and the accuracy or the functionality I can build into the prototype. And we've never been able to do both, have quick application, but also full functionality. And that's, from a UX standpoint, that should be our gold standard about what we're trying to achieve. No longer pictures of what we're trying to get to, but much closer to implemented tools and implemented functionality. So I think there's, again, even from an implementation perspective, there's real potential to, I hate to use the word, but synergy that's starting to be on the table that I don't think was there even 2-3 years ago.
Yeah,
you say paradigm, I'm leaving.
It kind of, low code kind of gives that opportunity for designers to be, for all designers to be kind of that unicorn designer, the one who can do everything, right? So it'll be interesting to see if that comes into.
It does. I mean, I'm not asking people to put their hands up or anything, but ask yourself the question: how many people on this call think they could actually design a chatbot and implement it while they designed it and build it such that it was production ready, and also potentially able to reach into data within the organization and pull back information. So it isn't just a sort of a hard-coded, where are my stores? I have a store in Dublin, Waterford and Limerick type of thing that you can hard-code into the conversational design, but actually would go to a system behind the scenes and pull back the list of stores and then tell that to a customer. And how many of you think you could actually make that work through Teams using speech so that people could talk to it and it would use AI to recognize what people were saying? Carry accents accepted, but broadly speaking, understand what people are saying to it, and able to type to it and use the same thing and surface it in your websites. Because you all can, you just don't know because you don't have the tool in front of you. I've just shown you the tool. It's the visual designer that I put on the screen there that lets you do that. It's a grand silence.
You've just blown us all away, Peter. That's what's happened, really.
Are you still asking the questions, Billy?
Yeah, I've got one more here.
Okay.
So I think this person might have, I believe might have dropped off, but I'll ask their question anyway. How does integrating low code into the design workflow impact on the collaboration with the development team and the handover?
That's an interesting way of putting it, because I would have said that it's us design integrating into low code rather than low code integrating into design, because normally we're part of a development process ultimately. And I'm not sure, as you said earlier, Peter, that much changes in substance, but I do think things can happen quicker because we're focusing on the bits that we need to think about, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you answered the question. I'm not sure how I would have answered it, Brian, to be perfectly honest with you. It's always going to be a collaboration. It's always going to be, design working with implementation. All that's changed here is the tools that we're using have changed and accelerated the pace of change, which then has implications for the design process, I suppose, and the stages you might go through and how fast you can move through them and how iteratively you might move through them. But it's, and also the possibility, as I've just said, that designers can actually be the implementers as well. You're designing the system. If the implementation becomes significantly simpler and you don't need a computer science degree to do it, why would the designer not be the implementer as well?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how, I know you spoke earlier on about, you still need to do a good job to make sure that that the what's put out there is working. But if that ability to work fast, break things and rebuild is enabled by low code, if that will stand true, or if people will release on such a rapid rate that it's just continuous learning from design, and there is more comfort there in breaking things. I'm
not a big fan of breaking things. It just isn't a good approach. It doesn't take account of the fact that you've got a customer base, whether they're internal users or public, doesn't matter, who are expecting things to work and expecting things to look similar each time they come in and not have to relearn what they're expected to do each time. So it might be convenient for the startup that wants to get to market quickly to not think it through and not design it fully, but I don't like it as a strategy. It's kind of arrogant. It's not taking account of the end user's needs of the system.
Yeah, I guess that's another role of design, right? It's managing that, and whoever is running that design team, or either on client side or wherever there's a huge responsibility there to manage what's going on. And the idea of the citizen designer is that you can hand over the reins, but really, in large organizations, it can't work there. So it'll be interesting to see on a organization level what happens. A bit like design systems, what systems what business practices need to be in place for design systems to work, and equally, how will that reflect for low code as it takes more traction.
Okay. I see Kieran's asked the question now, which with your permission, I'll have a go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Answering. So Kieran asked, why are the public facing front ends still bespoke Angular? And the answer is because the evolution of the low-code platforms has really focused on servicing the in-house, back office type of systems more than it's focused on the public facing type of side of things. So the tool set just isn't that flexible. And when a company does stuff, it can have what it would regard as slightly less designed internal systems, but it wants to present a facade to the outside world that is, very professional and very aligned with the whole marketing brand Bible. And sometimes it just isn't possible to, using the tools that are available today in the low-code platform, to align with that brand Bible and have exactly 6 pixels of resolution around the logo, and it must be exactly this color and that structure. Plus, you can't get quite the flow that you want. The flow through the system, it tends to be quite prescribed at the moment. But everything's changing, and these low-code platforms are constantly evolving. I mean, literally every couple of months, there's a new version, a new release, new functionality arriving in. So I would fully expect that the new frontier will be these portals will become significantly more capable, and everything you can do in a bespoke solution will be available for visual design.
What do you see as the possibility of an interim, like a hybrid approach, where it kind of marries up a bit of both?
It does at the moment, Kieran, in the sense that the Angular front end is riding on the business processes and the data sets and using the APIs into the low-code backend to do most of what it wants to do. So if let's say you're applying for a credit card, for example, you might fill out the form in a beautiful form on the Angular front end, and then it posts that data back. It goes through the credit reference checking in the back office and comes back to the Angular front end and says, yes, you're passed for, you're approved for your credit card or whatever. I don't know that there will be a true hybrid. I think it's going to be a bit like the back office stuff, that it'll reach a pivot point at which suddenly the front end design is capable of matching what you can do with a fully bespoke HTML5, CSS3 type of implementation. And at that point, we'll switch and we'll stop using bespoke and we'll start using drag and drop designers for it.
Cool.
Great. I've just noticed we've hit our hour-long mark. Is there any last question there? And if not,
who is this idiot you invited on?
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at the comments there, Peter, of people who've had to jump off recently, and they're really enjoyed it. So from the whole Each Another team, I want to thank you. It's been really interesting. I think it's a space that we'll all be more aware of, whether we hadn't noticed it before or whether we're very conscious of it. I think it's as you said, it's a space that's going to grow. So it'll be interesting to see how design evolves around that.
Thank you, Billy. It's been good talking to you. Yourself,
Brian, thank you also. Thank you for being part of the panel. And I'm going to send a survey around to the audience. So if you could fill that in, I'd really appreciate it. The feedback will only make our talks better in the future. So I appreciate anything.